We're looking back at our historical figures out of the lenses of the monochromatic, ideology that we've been fed in the last 7 decades. But somehow, in the midst of all of this, Savarkar has escaped a reassessment. Any study of the early Indian revolutionary movement is perhaps incomplete without a study of Savarkar, his writings, his philosophy, and his contribution to it. The power of the pen and the use of history as a tool to actually instigate, inspire young men to the path of revolution was what he did in his life. There had to be a sense of strategy, there had to be a sense of thinking, intellect that had to be put together. And this intellectual corpus that was provided to the revolutionary movement was done largely by Savarkar during this time. A very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for braving the Delhi heat and being here. I'm sorry the talk got delayed a bit. I would particularly like to acknowledge the kind presence of Lord Meghnad Desai and Lady Kishwar Desai who are here today, and all of you who are present. As the intellectual fountainhead of this whole idea of Hindu nationalism, about which we heard quite a bit from Dr. Ratan Sharda, someone who made the concept of Hindutva popular, Vinayak Damodar Savarkar is certainly one of the most contentious political figures and thinkers of our times today. I think even as we speak here, somewhere in some political rally, in some election, either someone is mocking him for his so-called mercy petitions or somebody is eulogizing him. So, and in the midst of these extremes of right and left, I think history becomes the casualty. There've been a number of problems that have plagued a study of Savarkar. One, as Dr. Sharda alluded in his speech, the fact that the Hindu Mahasabha that Savarkar headed for the longest period of time, right from 1937, and the RSS had huge differences on several issues. And that also probably led to the fact that, in the years after independence, and particularly after the regime change in 2014, while there have been attempts to redefine, rediscover the lives of many heroes of the past. We're going to hear about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose after this. So Netaji has been reassessed. Bhagat Singh, whether it's Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, we have a film now on Lal Bahadur Shastri. We're looking back at our historical figures out of the lenses of the monochromatic, ideology that we've been fed in the last 7 decades. But somehow, in the midst of all of this, Savarkar has escaped a reassessment. And one of the reasons for that also is the fact that most of his writings were in Marathi. In which he was a prolific writer, and it is a real sad fact that a lot of people who have read him have hardly accessed the Marathi originals that he wrote. Being half a Maharashtrian myself, and also with a copious amount of help that I received from Mr. Savarkar's grandson, Mr. Ranjit Savarkar, and other friends, I've been able to try to put together, a narrative of the man as probably never seen before, trying to understand the different complexities and also humanize him in the process. Now, a person like Savarkar cannot, be compressed in a talk of 1 hour. He's a man of multiple shades. So I will limit today's lecture to only one aspect of his very interesting and very stormy life, and that is his role and contribution to the Indian revolutionary movement. And that itself would come as a surprise to many, because we find it very difficult to accept anybody who's a revolutionary outside a Western Marxist kind of a lineage. And here is a man who did not draw his inspiration either from Marx or his ideology, but from the Italian revolutionaries, whether it was Mazzini, Garibaldi and others, and also the Irish revolutionaries. So, but then it would not be, I think, an exaggeration to say that any study of the early Indian revolutionary movement is perhaps incomplete without a study of Savarkar, his writings, his philosophy, and his contribution to it. And the most important part was he probably never wielded a gun himself, and his gun was his pen. And the power of the pen and the use of history as a tool to actually instigate, inspire young men to the path of revolution was what he did in his life, and which is what I shall be covering now in this talk. Now, between the time of the foundation of the Indian National Congress in 1885 and the very distinct schism that developed in it of the so-called moderates and the so-called extremists. We all have heard about it, read about it in our history books. There's sadly one parallel stream that has gone completely unnoticed and probably also unresearched, and that is that of the armed conflict, which was a constant buzz that was there with blips, ups and downs. There were lull periods, there were huge explosions, but it constantly kept going on from 1857, the uprising, till 1946, the naval mutiny in Bombay, about which I think Anuj would be talking about subsequently, Netaji and the INA. So in this entire stream of parallel struggle of freedom, if we actually flip the whole narrative of the Indian freedom struggle and look at it from the lens of the revolutionary or armed conflict, a completely different picture emerges, where the protagonists are different. Whom you call the moderates were probably called the loyalists. Whom you call the extremists probably become the nationalists. So history then takes a very different kind of a flavor and shade. So in the midst of this, Savarkar located himself right in the center of this long span of the parallel movement that I spoke of from 1857 to 1946, and as a protege of Bal Gangadhar Tilak. Now, Savarkar was born in a Chitpavan Brahmin household, in this very house in Bhagur, a small little village in Nashik district in Maharashtra, on 28th May, this very month, 1883. He was the second of three children, three boys, elder brother Ganesh Rao, a younger brother Narayan Rao, and a sister Maina. Now, this whole Chitpavan Brahmin community, there's a very interesting letter that the governor of Bombay, Sir Richard Temple, writes to the then Viceroy of India, Lord Lytton, and he says, it's normally assumed that the British took over India from the Mughals, but actually we seem to have taken the country from the Marathas. And it's because the vast part of the country that was under Maratha, control, is whom they ultimately defeated in the War of 1818 and took over India. And the Marathas, the Peshwas, belong to the family of the Chitpavan Brahmin community. And Lord Temple says that whatever we do, how much ever education we give them, how much ever facilities we give them, they are part of the civil service, they are part of different government bodies, but still their disaffection for us will not cease. They are this militant type who will not give up their hatred for us. And his statement was borne out by the fact that most of the great reformers, educationists, lawyers, thinkers of the time in Maharashtra, right from Gopal Krishna Gokhale to Bal Gangadhar Tilak to Chiplunkar, Vishnu Shastri Chiplunkar, Ganesh Agarkar, and of course Savarkar, were all from this very community. Again, this little house which is still there here, and right from his childhood, Savarkar actually abhorred the caste system, and despite being an upper caste, so-called upper caste Brahmin boy, he always loved to mix with. His friends were all from the lower caste, and he, ate with them, played with them, and he was also an extremely voracious reader, much beyond his age. And his common, pastime was to read all these newspapers and books along with all of them, have discussions with them. So this sense of, community living, community prospering, rather than in competition with anyone, was a childhood trait. Now, simultaneously, poetry germinated in him when he was all of 8 years old. And when he was 6 years old, he lost his mother, Radhabai, to cholera, and it was left thereafter to his father, Damodar Pant, to actually look after the four children. Now, around this time in Maharashtra, there was this scourge of plague that ravaged different parts of the state. And the British government, in its whole, zeal to actually control the epidemic, took a very repressive measure, which was those families which were detected of plague, the police would actually storm into those houses, evacuate them, women would be molested, the puja ghars would be desecrated, and these people had to then be ostracized into camps which were far away from the towns. So most of them, if there was a dead rat that was found anywhere in the house, it would be kept a secret till the time it actually, mass deaths or something come into the forefront and people get to know that plague has hit this particular family. So this anti-plague measures were so repressive that it caused a lot of consternation among the people who were in Maharashtra, and there were three brothers who decided to take revenge for this act of the British, and they were the Chafekar brothers. The Damodar Hari Chafekar, Balakrishna Hari Chafekar, and his younger brother Vasudev Hari Chafekar. And these people decided that they'll pick up the gun and actually assassinate the plague officer of Pune, whose name was Walter Rand, and his lieutenant Charles Aist. Now this whole assassination sent shockwaves in Bombay. People thought, and Lord Temple's letter did seem to come true. They also belong to the Chitpavan community. They are militant, they'll not, and these were all actually English educated and all of that, and despite the fact they were ready to pick up arms and kill one of the British officials themselves. So it caused both kinds of reactions in Maharashtrian society. On the one hand, the British of course despised them. A lot of Maharashtrian newspapers themselves, including the Kesari, actually denounced this as a foolhardy attempt. Young Savarkar was just about 14 years then, and he was so touched and moved by the heroic tales that were going on about the Chafekars, the way in which they were taken to the gallows with a smile and with verses of the Gita on their lips, that he decided that he would go to the idol of his family deity, the Ashtabhuja Bhavani, the eight-handed goddess Bhavani, which had come to them as family heir, and this is still there in the temple of Khandoba in Bhagur. And he made a vow in front of her in Marathi: Shatrus marta marta mare to zanzain. I will, pick up my gun and fight till my end, killing my enemy, till the last enemy is there. And this seemed like a very childish, vow that someone made at the age of 14. But little did history know that a whole generation was going to face the repercussions of this one night's vow that he took. He also composed, as I said, he had taken to Marathi poetry, being inspired by several old poets like Moropant and others, and he had an entire ballad written called Chapekarancha Fatka, or the Ballad of the Chafekars, which became something like a yuppie kind of a young anthem for a lot of youth in Maharashtra, even in up to the 1920s. Now, shortly after this, it so happened that Damodar Pant, the father, who was at the forefront of the plague operations, they used to literally carry these dead bodies and have them cremated because nobody would come forward to touch these plague infected corpses. And in the process, Damodar Pant himself contracted plague and he died. And the entire responsibility of taking care of the family fell on his younger brother, on his elder brother, who was himself not too old, Ganesh Damodar or Baba Rao Savarkar. And the family decided then to move away from Bhagur to Nashik. And there in these narrow gullies and lanes of Nashik, what is now the Tilabhandeshwar temple, which is still there, was formed India's first organized secret society of young revolutionaries. It was initially known as the Rashtra Bhakta Samuha, or the Association of Patriotic People. And along with 16-year-old Savarkar, there were two others, Rauji Krishna Phage and Triambak Rao Maskar, who formed this. Now, the way this society was structured, and Savarkar, as I said, was a voracious reader right from his childhood, and a lot of the things that he read were of Western scholars, Western thinkers, and Thomas Frost's secret societies of European revolutionaries made a very deep impact on him. And we see that in the formation, in the way this society was also formed. It was a secret society. And what Frost says, I quote here, that he had surveyed several such societies which existed in Europe for almost 100 years and written about some of the common features of these societies. He says, and I quote, "A secret society may be distinguished from other combinations by the adoption of an oath of secrecy and fidelity, an initiatory ceremony, and the use of symbols and passwords," unquote. So these three little boys, all in their 16, 20 age group, they decided to keep this society so secretive. Even Baba Rao didn't know that such a society existed. And slowly they used to have meetings that were held in different parts. And this was the house, the old picture of the house, the top story of the house where the society used to meet. and this is how it looks now. In fact, Savarkar, after independence, gave a lot of money to renovate this place and ensure that it's kept in good shape. Here is where they would meet and have a lot of discussions on various topics related to global history, the stories of revolutionaries, of Mazzini, Garibaldi, of Napoleon Bonaparte and others. And slowly they realized, and the passwords and secret things that were there. So the code word for the society was Ram Hari. So if someone said today Ram and Hari are going to meet, that means no one was going to understand that we are having a meeting. So Ram and Hari are going to meet at the Chai Ka Adda, which meant we are meeting at the office today evening. So it again complied to the requirements that Thomas Frost had set out. Now it was Savarkar who suggested that they needed a kind of a dual organization, and here I don't want to make any comparisons to the speaker who preceded me about why a dual organization is needed, a front end and a back end. A front organization which is more into societal outreach, which talks about cultural issues, which celebrates these Shivaji Jayantis and Ganesh Utsavs that Tilak had popularized in different parts of Maharashtra. And these could also become the hunting grounds for all these young revolutionaries who could then be brought into the core group and then given the oath and then made into hard-blooded revolutionaries. So this front-end organization that was formed was known as the Mitra Mela. That was the Rashtra Bhakta Samuha, and this was the Mitra Mela, the group of friends. So friends getting together, having a nice discussion, and then celebrating religious festivals and all of that, and nobody would actually have any kind of doubts expressed about it. Now even these, the Mitra Mela topics, whatever they be, it could be about religion, Vedanta, it could be about general topics, Savarkar would somehow steer the conversation back into the topic of political freedom and armed revolution and why it was so important. So they had actually decorated, this is how the room looks from inside. They had decorated the entire room with photographs of all the great revolutionaries. Right in the center, there was a big photograph of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and then all the great revolutionaries, right from Vasudev Balwant Phadke, a great revolutionaries of the 1870s, the Chafekars, and the 1857 stalwarts, Lakshmi Bai, Tantya Tope, all of them, Bahadur Shah Zafar. And the idea was to locate themselves as the rightful inheritors of this whole lineage of revolutionaries. Now though this little room, as you saw, it was those creaky little steps, it's as bad even now, though it was so far away from the main, the main road, and you could hardly hear what was being discussed. There would always be somebody who would loiter around in the street to say, if the voices are getting too loud, they would say, you better change the topic, or, you talk softly, because there'll be always somebody who would, lurk around, or the police would get alerted. Initially, they used to archive whatever was discussed, particularly the non-political issues, religious issues, so that, even if there's a police raid, they would look at it and say, okay, it's just some cultural organization and it's nothing very, harmful. And even the names of the registered members was not kept. So again, the whole strategy was very similar to that of secret societies. The objective was also kept as vague, striving for the all-round development of our country, whatever that means. So this was how they operated in this little room in Nashik. And here it was also important, as I said, these discussions of Savarkar would also try to make the other members, make common villagers also being nationally conscious as well as globally conscious about the kind of activities that were happening all over the world. And it's very important here to also emphasize that our historical narrative has probably brought revolutionary movements as these mindless activities of these firebranded radicals who are conducting political assassinations, throwing bombs here and there. But that was not so. There had to be a sense of strategy, there had to be a sense of thinking, intellect that had to be put together. And this intellectual corpus that was provided to the revolutionary movement was done largely by Savarkar during this time. Now, at this point, so in January 1902, Savarkar enrolled at the prestigious Fergusson College in Pune, and he moved there. And it was here that he composed this very famous song, which I thought a little bit of it I should play. So this was almost the the recreation of the Bankim Chandra Chatterjee for Maharashtra, where the female nature of the nation was invoked, and Jayostute Swatantrate Bhagavati. This was the Swatantra Lakshmi, the Murti of Swatantra Lakshmi, which is still there at that particular room in Nashik. And all their letters would start with Swatantra Lakshmi ki Jai, or hail the goddess of freedom. So that was what happened then. And with Savarkar moving to Pune, the onus of running the Mitra Mela fell largely on the elder brother Baba Rao. And so it was very ironical. He was someone who wanted to renounce the whole family life and actually become a sannyasi under Swami Vivekananda. And from there, it was like a 180-degree shift to actually become a hardcore revolutionary, which he became. And he started organizing lectures of various people in Nashik. And in 1903, it was decided that there were so many members in different parts. What just started in that little room, there were branches that started opening in different parts of Maharashtra. So like the Congress adhiveshans and sessions that used to happen, they decided, let's get everyone together in a conference. So the first conference was held in 1903 in Dhule, and nearly 70 members from different parts of Maharashtra attended this. And the very next year in 1904, about 200 members of the Mitra Mela had actually come together. And it was here that Savarkar decided to change the name of the society from Mitra Mela to actually Abhinav Bharat, or Young India, just on the lines of the Young Italy of Mazzini. And these were some of the young Turks of the Abhinav Bharat, all dressed up in their wonderful Maharashtrian attire. And it was, as I said, there were these initiatory ceremonies that one had to go through. So there was the sword of, alleged sword of Chhatrapati Shivaji, which one had to touch. And there was arghya of water given. And then an oath was actually administered to all of them. Now the society members themselves used to destroy these oaths so that nobody got to know about it. But with a lot of difficulty, I think I managed to get a copy of that original from the British Library in London, which is where I think everything about us will be found. And this is what it reads. Bande Mataram, salutations to the mother, in the name of God, in the name of Bharat Mata, in the name of all the martyrs that have shed their blood for Bharat Mata, by the love innate in all men and women that I bear to the land of my birth, wherein lies the sacred ashes of my forefathers, and which is the cradle of my children, by the tears of the countless mothers for their children whom the foreigner has enslaved, imprisoned, tortured and killed, I, such and such, convinced that without absolute political independence or Swarajya, my country can never rise to the exalted position among the nations of the earth which is her due, and convinced also that Swarajya can never be attained except by the waging of a bloody and relentless war against the foreigner, I solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall from this moment do everything in my power to fight for independence and place the lotus crown of Swaraj on the head of my mother. And with this object I joined the Abhinav Bharat, the revolutionary society of all Hindustan, and I swear that I shall ever be true and faithful to this, my solemn oath, and that I shall obey the orders of this body. If I betray the whole or any part of this solemn oath, or I betray this organization or any other working with a similar object, may I be doomed to the fate of a perjurer. So this was the oath that all of them took, and annual sessions then became a regular feature. In 1905, it was held at Kothur, in 1906 in Sion, and slowly what they also started doing was they started attending the Congress sessions in different parts, in Calcutta, Surat and so on. And in the day they would appear like Congress members, attend the conference. And slowly by night, all the revolutionaries would get together. And particularly since the two main hotbeds of revolution in India at that time was Maharashtra and Bengal, Punjab came in much later, maybe after the Jallianwala Bagh incident. But the main hotbeds being Bengal, the Anushilan Samiti, Swadhin Bharat and other organizations that were germinating in Bengal. So a lot of these Abhinav Bharat members started forming these alliances with them, talks with them. So the idea was again, what I emphasized right at the beginning, create that coordinated, armed rebellion, disaffection in the army, and ensure that it's a coordinated response. And in the days when there was no WhatsApp groups and all of that, it was only this way that you could probably get together and have this coordinated attack. So there they met people like Aurobindo Ghosh and his brother Barindranath Ghosh, who were all later involved in the Alipur bomb case. So soon, branches of Abhinav Bharat started mushrooming at Junnar, Bombay, Pend, Satara, Nagpur, Nagar, Sholapur, Dhule, Kolhapur, Baroda, Indore, Gwalior, Aurangabad, Hyderabad, and several other places. So from that small little room, in just a span of 5 years, you had an organization that had spread its tentacles so far and wide. And it was one thing to start an organization, but as the leader of the organization, what was the strategy? What was the thinking? What was the purpose with which this was set? And so I think the best is Savarkar speaking himself, and I shall quote here. The Abhinav Bharat calls for total and complete freedom, to attain which armed revolution is an inevitable means. And mind you, he's talking about total and complete freedom at the time when the Congress moderates were still passing on petitions to say, let us give us a little bit of an increase in judiciary, a little bit of all of that. Even Tilak was not talking about Purna Swaraj as yet. But he goes on to say, but was our goddess of freedom, that Ashtabhuja Bhavani, Swatantra Lakshmi, was she a bloodthirsty and anarchist deity? No, not at all. The excess of hyper-nationalism is as dangerous as the complete lack of it. I think a very important word for our times. We need to deliberate on the binaries of violence versus non-violence, truth versus falsehood, nationalism and humanity in our weekly meetings. Our testing stone needs to be utilitarianism, the maximum good to the maximum people. But truth is again relative, and how do we then define what is good and what is bad? Well, the obvious act such as a thief going scot-free and a saint being executed is clearly bad, untruth, disqualification, adharma. And whenever the cruel exploiting force gags the voice of truth in this manner, then the forces of justice must unite to decimate them, and to do that, secretive and strategic coming together becomes our dharmic responsibility. After all, Lord Krishna also grew up in stealth in Nanda's house before killing Kamsa. If he had gone strictly with the truth, he would have been killed by Kamsa's demons. Similarly, Shivaji stealthily escaped from Aurangzeb's capture. Secrecy per se is neither good nor bad, but what its utility is for gives it a positive or negative character. Similar is the case with national struggle. For the restoration of legitimate rights through which the maximum good is possible for the maximum number of people, the struggle through violence is also a virtuous act, while supporting an exploitative force that captures another's land, property and rights and destroys another's house is demonic and needs to be destroyed ruthlessly. The nation must always be good for its people. Unquote. So this was the founding, principle of a secret society according to Savarkar. And what were the measures that he recommended that they took? Because that's also important. You had such a large organization, 500 members spread across different parts of India. He says, infiltrating the army and the police, creating a vast network of a secret armed force, establishing contacts with revolutionaries from Russia, Italy, Ireland and other countries, striking attacks on the main protagonists of British administration, having stocks of arms in the provinces and border areas for quick deployment in case of need, low intensity revolts all the time to keep the administration busy and diverted before a big blow can be dealt with, and most importantly, the will to die and to inspire others to do as well. We also know, he says, that all the 30 crore Indians would not join us. But even if 2 lakh brave people come and join our movement, it would suffice. Those who called revolution as childish and mindless and relied only on servile applications must realize that their means are flawed and that can never help us achieve the goal of complete freedom. We are just a matchstick, but please know that if we light it, we can burn down the whole edifice of a palace, as has happened all over the world. So, a teenager with clarity of mind, vision and purpose, and leading a pack of followers in the right path. That was what he was doing. Now, around this time in Pune, you also had, it was 1905, it was the time of the partition of Bengal. And it was under Savarkar's advice that Tilak decided to organize this first mass bonfire of foreign goods in India, which was done in Pune. And Abhinav Bharat cadres went all over the town, gave fiery speeches, and ensured that cartloads of foreign clothes were collected, and a mass bonfire was then held. And the principal of Fergusson College, Sir Raghunath Purushottam Paranjpe, he was an Anglophile. He was in fact the first Indian to achieve the coveted title of Senior Wrangler at the University of Cambridge. And he was in fact known as Wrangler Paranjpe, and he was so aghast that one of his students had indulged in such an anti-national activity. And so he rusticated Savarkar from the college. He was also made to pay a fine of ₹10. So I think the credit of not only organizing the first student bonfire in the country, but also facing the flak and paying the price for it, goes to him during this time. Now, around this time, after he finished his Bachelor of Arts and LLB in Pune, Tilak recommended Savarkar's name to that great colossus for Indian revolutionaries, Shyamji Krishna Varma, a great scholar who had degrees from Oxford and Cambridge in Sanskrit. He had served as a Diwan in several princely states. In fact, it was his ashes which Prime Minister Modi brought back to India after so many years. It was there, and he said, till my country is free, I don't want my ashes to come to a dependent country. So he wrote to, Shyamji was giving a lot of scholarships and fellowships to young Indians, particularly those of the revolutionary bent of mind, to come over to different parts of Europe, particularly London, and study there. And so he recommended Savarkar's name, and he got the fellowship, and he moved to London in the year 1906. And this was the famous house in London, in Highgate, called the India House. And you also have the famous blue plaque of the Greater London Council, where they still mention that Indian patriot and philosopher lived here. Whatever we Indians may call him in our political rallies, I think the British still recognize him as an Indian patriot. So it was this India House which became a hotbed of some of the greatest revolutionaries of those times. Lala Hardayal, VVS Iyer, Virendranath Chattopadhyay, Madanlal Dhingra, MPT Acharya, Madam Bhikaji Kama, who kept coming in and out. Then there was Sardar Singh Rana, Sukhsagar Dutt, Sikandar Hayat Khan, Asif Ali Khan of Nabha, several others. And no sooner than he reached London, he decided to start a branch of Abhinav Bharat there also. And that was, of course, rechristened as Free India Society. And it did quite the same kind of work. And this was a complete different picture, all of them in English suits compared to that Maharashtrian attire that you saw some time back. All of them sitting in front of the India House in London in 1906 or 7. So they held regular meetings, celebrated religious festivals such as Dashera, the birth and death anniversaries of great leaders like Shivaji, Guru Gobind Singh, Guru Nanak, and all of that. And several Indian students from Cambridge, Oxford, Edinburgh, Manchester, they all started becoming members of the Free India Society. Now, within 6 months of reaching London, Savarkar decided to access the entire corpus of Joseph Mazzini's writings and translate them into Marathi. There's about 300 pages with a 25-page preface which he wrote. Now, here also, I mean, it's all in a very, very coded language. It's not a direct call to action to Indians, but using the Italian example, he gave a prescription for what Indians could do likewise in India. So princely states there under Austrian control, they had a lack of arms. So they used to go to other countries, smuggle arms, form secret societies, learn the art of warfare, and then execute this, spread disaffection in the army. So he just mentioned that Italy did all of this. So samajhne wale samajh gaye, this is what we need to do in India also, and that is how we would be able to carry on the revolution in his absence while he was in London. Now the British obviously got track of this, and they proscribed this manuscript. It was sent back to India, smuggled, and sent to Baba Rao, who published it, but the manuscript was proscribed in July 1907. Now, over the next 2 years, from 1908 to 1909, he completed his monumental and meticulously researched work on the 1857 uprising, and it was credit to him that it was first called the First War of Independence, till then demonized as the Sepoy Mutiny. And this is his original writing and the original manuscript of that, which I managed to pick up from his grandson, where he dismissed all these colonial arguments of greased cartridges, economic motives of royal families, the doctrine of lapse, which was all done. And he argued that it was a nationalist ideology, which was what motivated the uprising, and it also led to the end of Hindu-Muslim enmity and working towards a common cause. And he says, again, and I quote from his work, translated from Marathi, "Can any sane man maintain that an all-embracing revolution could have taken place without a principle to move it? Could that vast tidal wave from Peshawar to Calcutta have risen in blood without a fixed intention of throwing something by means of its force? Every revolution must have a fundamental principle. A revolutionary movement cannot be based on a flimsy and momentary grievance, like those grease cartridge or whatever. It is always due to some all-moving principle for which hundreds and thousands of men fight. The moving spirits of revolution are deemed holy or unholy in proportion to the principle underlying them, whether it's beneficial or wicked. In history, the deeds of an individual or nation are judged by the character of the motive. To write a full history of a revolution means necessarily tracing all the events back to their sources, the motive," unquote. And the motives, according to him, were twofold. One was Swarajya and Swadharma, for the cause of one's own rule and also own protection of one's religion, both of which were under threat under the British rule. And for him, the book actually did not actually call for widespread revolution, mayhem, anarchy or anything, but again a strategist who advised his followers strike when the iron is hot. And as I said right in the beginning, to give India that sense of a history of her own and use that as a tool of inspiration for young revolutionaries. Now this book too, it has a book on history has a fascinating history of itself. So so the manner in which they would smuggle these to India was very wonderful. They would put them in very artistic covers with false names called the Don Quixote papers, the posthumous Pickwick papers, and all kinds of names in false bottoms. And then evading custom officials in different countries, it would finally reach India. And when it came to Baba Rao in Solapur, he tried to get it published, but somehow the British got to know. The book was, they hounded him, the printing press refused to print it, so he sent it back to London. From there, the manuscript went to Paris, where again the British got to know, and then the police raided the printing presses. So then again the manuscript, they decided to take it from there and take it to Germany. Because given the huge amount of Indology influence there, they thought the Nagari script is something that people there would know. So, but then the type press made a mess of it, and so the book was the project was abandoned, and it was later sent to Belgium, and that was where it was finally printed and later translated and then smuggled back to India and sent to different parts of India as a kind of a Bible for revolutionaries. So, in fact, the Viceroy Lord Minto, in a very terse statement, says, "I hope we can stop Savarkar's book on the mutiny from entering India at any cost," and he underlines that. And so the British invoked several laws of the time, Sea Customs Act, the Post Office Act, to ensure that the manuscript doesn't come here, because they knew the dangers that were involved in writing. And as I said, he may not have wielded a weapon himself, but the power of the pen was being mightier than the sword, I think is best exemplified in his case, which is what the British were so terrified of him and wanted him eliminated at all costs. Now, along with intellectual corpus, there was also a lot of revolutionary work too that was done. There was Hemchandra Das Kanungo on the right, and his Savarkar's associate Senapati Bapat, or Pandurang Mahadev Bapat, who he sent both of them to Paris to learn the art of making a bomb. So there was this famous bomb manual that was supposed to be doing the rounds in France, and so they wanted to learn and get that back to India. Now they went there. That again is like an Alfred Hitchcock kind of a film where they kept changing from one hotel to the other because the police were all constantly behind their backs, and they were led to a Russian professor who told them all about secret societies, who then led them to a Russian tailor. And imagine, lo and behold, you had a bomb manual with a Russian tailor. Now these guys took the manual and then realized that this is all in Russian. Now how do we read this damn thing? So then, there are different versions of how that was then translated. One version says the tailor himself took them to two Russian ladies. One of them, Miss Amaya, who was doing her MBBS in Berlin. So they went all the way from France to Berlin, and she translated this. She took her own time. She took 1 year to put this whole thing, and these poor men actually waited till then to get that translated. The other version is that Senapati Bapat had a German girlfriend, and her name was Anna Claus, who again lived in Berlin. So irrespective of whether it was a girlfriend or it was somebody else, there was some lady in Berlin who knew Russian, but who took a long time of almost a year to sit and translate these photographs. It was almost 50 to 60 photographs, which were then translated, cyclostyled, and sent back, again evading customs, doing all those false bottom packages. Now, along with this, two other associates, the great Indian revolutionary Madam Bhikaji Kama, about whom so little is known or written, and Sardar Singh Rana, they represented India at the International Socialist Congress, which was held on 22nd August 1907 at Stuttgart in Germany. Now, the British tried their level best to ensure that they were not given a chance to speak at this conference, but somehow they managed to. Not only did Madam Kama speak, but she also unfurled openly the first flag of Indian independence, which was actually designed by Savarkar. It had three stripes, green, saffron and red, and in the center Vande Mataram written in gold. There were 8 stars representing the states of India, and also the sun and the moon representing the different faiths, the Hindu and Muslim faiths of India. So it was like the first representative flag of all India, which Savarkar designed and which Kama unfurled there, and total freedom, no compromise on that, is what she postulated. Now, the fact that the British considered, slowly they realized that, this very innocuous, beautiful looking house, there was lots of things going on behind. There were reports that there was a small little laboratory of bomb manufacture in the background, and Savarkar himself used to come out with an apron full of picric acid and all of that, all over him, trying to blow up a bomb and so on. So they realized that something is amiss, and they finally decided that we should put this place under strict surveillance. Now, the way the British surveillance worked was also very odd. On the one hand, you had the special branch of the Metropolitan Police in London, and which took care of all these people whom they called anarchists. And their counterpart in India was the Department of Criminal Intelligence, or DCI, and the director of which was a very, very important man. He collected reports from all the presidencies, princely states, made weekly reports which were sent to the Viceroy and to the Secretary of State of India. Now, these two organizations, like typical British bureaucracy, never spoke to each other. And so there was always loss of information, loss of translation between these two organizations. But then there were spies who would lurk around the room trying to find out. There were some who would infiltrate the organization, Maharashtrians, who would say, I want to join the Free India Society, but then there would be agents who would actually carry messages back to the British. So one of his associates, MPT Acharya, talks about this intelligence gathering system of the British, which was so flawed, and I quote him again. Early in the morning, the detectives used to stand or loiter around near the house to follow anyone who went out of the India House. First, it was disgusting for me to see their faces. I wanted to make use of them as my guide. I went out for a walk. About 50 yards behind me, one detective followed me like my shadow. I went on walking till I passed a post office. Then I walked back. The detective was waiting before the post office to let me pass. Suddenly, when I came in front of the post office, I asked him, "Where is the post office, please?" The man answered, "I don't know." I asked him then, "If you can't help me find out the post office, why do you follow me?" He was very perturbed and angry. I used to try the same method upon every new man that was set against me to show that I know who he was. Sometimes Savarkar and other members of the house tried to get rid of these detectives in a very peculiar manner. They walked till they came to a lone taxi and suddenly jumped into it and drove away, while the detective used to stand helpless looking for another free taxi, unquote. Now, copies of this bomb manual, which were procured there, were sent to India along with Browning pistols, which was very rare to get in India then. And these reached several revolutionaries in different parts of India: Khudiram Bose, Prafulla Chaki, Kanhaiya Dutt, Satyendra Bose, and this young man of all of 17, Anant Lakshman Kanhere, who was so in Nashik, who was so fired up against the British that he decided that I'm going to assassinate the district collector of Nashik, A.M.T. Jackson. And it's a very poignant picture in itself, because he knew that he was going to shoot him point blank, and he knew he was going to be caught and executed. So just 2 days before the assassination, he goes to a studio and gets himself photographed in all wonderful attire, and he writes behind it saying, "This is the last memory that my family will have of me." And so that was the photo in a studio in Nashik. And there was a public reception that was organized for Jackson at the Vijayanand Theatre, which is still there in Nashik. And when he came there, Kanhere goes and murders him. And this again creates a huge sensation, and the natural suspicion falls on Baba Rao and the whole Abhinav Bharat there. A lot of them get arrested. Baba Rao is tried and sent to 25 years of life imprisonment, called transportation for life, to the Kalapani cellular jail in the Andamans. But undeterred by all of this, back in London, another associate of Savarkar, Madan Lal Dhingra, he took it upon himself that there was this Lord Curzon Wyllie, who was a former British MP, and he was also the person who was in charge of conducting the surveillance on the Indian students. So let's assassinate him. And Savarkar gave him the pistol and told him, unless you kill him and come, don't show me your face. Because he had made several attempts to kill Lord Curzon and Lord Morley, but had failed. And so this was a chance that he didn't want to leave. And he finally succeeded in killing Curzon Wyllie in 1909. He was put to trial, and he gave this epic statement. It's there all over the internet. People can see the statement of bravery, which many say Savarkar actually wrote for him and also got it published in London newspapers. And in fact, Lala Hardayal wrote, and I quote again, "In times to come, when the British Empire in India shall have been reduced to dust and ashes, Dhingra's monuments will adorn the squares of our chief towns, recalling to the memory of our children the noble life and the noble death of one who laid down his life in a far-off land for the cause he loved so well," unquote. Unfortunately, I don't think anyone in India or in Indian history textbooks, as you were mentioning, has much of a mention of Madan Lal Dhingra at all. Now, finally, the British finally realized that there was a huge movement with intercontinental, ramifications, and this had to be stopped at any cost. Now, another question to ask is, why did most of these people, the Indian Revolutionary movement actually happened outside India a lot more than within India? That was because the colonial laws that were so strict, particularly the sedition laws, which continue to be strict, were not as bad as in these metropoles of London and Paris. So most of these revolutionaries operated from there, and it was very easy to even send to buy arms and also to smuggle them. So Virendranath Chattopadhyay and Madam Kama used to send revolvers to India, concealing them in toys which were called as Christmas presents. So, and then, that would then be used by revolutionaries. So a huge unraveling. Finally, the Metropolitan Police and the DCI in India started talking to each other, and a lot of documentation which is available in the British Library shows that they woke up to the danger that they were facing, and they realized that the main kingpin of this whole thing was Savarkar, and he was arrested in London on multiple charges, including procuring and distributing arms, sedition, and waging of war against the King Emperor of India. Now, and this photograph also, the way he's sitting there in royal splendor and with not a sense of remorse on his face, was taken after he was arrested. The usual photos you take of prisoners, where they're all giving these blank looks. But this guy had this confident look on his face saying, I don't care at all for what you're going to do. And so the British also were very keen that he should be deported to India. And because, as I said, the laws there were so much stricter that they could keep him in jail for life. And that is exactly what they wanted, considering he was termed as a dangerous D category prisoner. But Savarkar and all his associates across Europe tried to ensure in all ways to see that, he can be tried in London itself so that he could be let off, because a very, very unfair Fugitive and Offenders Act was invoked against him. And he was not a fugitive. He was a bona fide student who had gone there on a scholarship. So on what basis are you going to, arrest? And the trail was so flimsy, though we know now that he sent the Browning pistols or the bomb manual. The British documentation doesn't really show. It was all on the basis of inference and hearsay. So they thought they had a very, very strong case to ensure that he doesn't get, he doesn't face, go back to India. But somehow he lost the cases in London and he was sent to India, and on his way back he was sent in this ship called SS Moria. And when even there, there was strict surveillance around him. There were 2 guards who would always loiter everywhere. Even if he had to go to the toilet, there would be 2 people who would stand out and see, when he's coming back. Now, despite all this, dodging all this, when the ship was docked at the port of Marseille in France, this man, on the pretext of going to the toilet, managed to open the porthole of the toilet and jump into the sea and swam a few yards and went into French territory. And then he goes there and then he finds a French sergeant and he doesn't know French. So he says, please take me to a magistrate, please take me to a magistrate. And by then these people have seen him jump out. The British soldiers come running behind. It's like a huge drama in itself. And then the French man doesn't understand English. They don't know how to communicate with each other. And finally he says, okay, take him. He says, thief is all that they heard. And so he hands over this fellow to the British soldiers who bring him back. Now, this became a huge case of international arbitration at the court, the International Court of Hague, just like what we are facing now with Jadhav between India and Pakistan. Because Savarkar's contention was that, look, I'm an Indian citizen and I landed on French territory. And so now the right to either capture me or deport me, extradite me to India is not with those British soldiers, but with the French authorities. So if France, so he was a lawyer and he knew the law and knew how to exploit it. It's always, I think, excellent to learn and understand law, because then you know what the loopholes of that are. So, with no offense to any lawyers who might be present here though. So he knew that this was the case, and so it was up to France to decide whether you let them back. And the French Prime Minister Briand was under immense pressure. It was like French sovereignty has been taken over by Britain, and we are under immense pressure in the parliament, and the government almost came to the step of collapse. So Britain and France took the case all the way to Hague. But Britain somehow managed to ensure that it had its way, arm twist France, and Savarkar lost the case there also. And in the trial that was held in India called the Nasik conspiracy trial and the Nasik murder trial, 2 simultaneous trials, it was the most unfair of trials. First of all, the charges invoked on him were unfair, and even the trial was unfair because it was without a jury or without a right to a lawyer or an appeal. And so when the judge actually asked him, what do you have to say in self-defense, he's supposed to have gallantly told him that, look, I don't believe in the sovereignty or authority of this court. So I know the outcome is fixed. So there is no point in my argument, and I'm fine to face whatever comes my way. And the punishment that came was the maximum that was given to anybody, which was 2 life terms of imprisonment, which meant 50 years, 25 years of 1 life imprisonment, to Kalapani in cellular jail. And in fact, it is said in the court records that even then he's supposed to have borne it with such fortitude and said that, okay, finally the British also have agreed to the Hindu tradition of 2 life terms and reincarnation. So I'm happy that I've been given 2 life terms of imprisonment. Now, after this, there were lots of, in Bande Mataram, which Madame Kama ran in Paris, there were lots of agitations in different parts of Europe for his release, which even the Europeans also participated in, but nothing came to any fruition. And finally, he was sent to the cellular jail in Andamans. And this is a very, very rare photograph of him on the glass plate film of him actually in the prisoner attire. At cellular jail, that's a different story altogether. He faced probably one of the most inhuman punishments that anyone could have. 6 months of solitary confinement with standing, constant standing handcuffs. So there was no human contact whatsoever. His cell faced the gallows. So every time, all of the human contact that he had was of screaming men who were taken to the gallows to be hanged. And even basic human facilities like toilet and good food was not provided to him and also the other political prisoners of Alipur bomb case and others who were lodged at cellular jail. The food was Bansi food. It had pieces of reptiles and all kinds of things there. So most of them, when they ate it, they would end up with diarrhea. And there were fixed times to go to the toilet. In no other time you could go, to the toilet. And if you had to go, you had to bribe the warder and he would beat you up and all kinds of things, abuse you. And so most of them actually used to defecate in their cells, and you had to stand. I'm sorry to narrate this, but I think this country needs to know, all those jokers who keep talking about, what were those mercy petitions, who is a patriot and who is a coward, needs to know the kind of tortures that a lot of people outside this mono narrative of the great fighters of our freedom struggle actually bore and didn't make a huge song and dance of it. And so this kind of treatment, as I said, punishing handcuffs, this kolhu, which was also, so the handcuffs, this was how you had to stand for 6 months in a row. And this thing that you see here was the kolhu, the oil grinding mill, where usually the bell, the chalata hai usko, but then here you had the man who had to do it all day. And there was a stipulated weight of the oil that you had to extract. And at the end of the day, if you hadn't, and most of them would not, 30 pounds or something of oil, and if you did not extract that, you were flogged, you were not given food, which anyway they didn't want to eat that food, but still you needed to sustain. And even while you're doing that, and in the heat of Port Blair and Andaman, where they were given these gunny sacks, clothes made of gunny sacks to wear, which led to skin rashes, skin diseases, all kinds of tortures, which he and several others, Barin Ghosh, Ulaskar Dutt, and all of them have, it breaks your heart to actually read those, this thing. Many people either went mad. There was Ulaskar Dutt actually went insane. He was put in, there was a special mental asylum that was started in island of Hado in Port Blair. There was Indu Bhushan Roy who actually committed suicide because he said death is better than this hellhole. So this was the kind of torture that most of them faced, and this was his cell. It was a double-ended cell where entry to it was restricted, and I think the most famous and those were the it was not very clear here, but those were the vessels which were given to them, one for daily ablutions and one for the food that was given in that the rotten little plate. So and this was, I think, popularized recently when the Prime Minister also paid his homage at this particular place. So it was after 12 long years, and I'm sure there'll be questions about the mercy petition, so I will not talk about it here. After he was arrested in 1910, and in 1921 he was released from cellular jail but taken to first Ratnagiri prison and then Yerwada jail, and in 1924 he was actually released to join his family. This is a family portrait. Savarkar, his elder brother Ganesh Rao, the younger brother Narayan Rao, their respective wives. The one in the center is his sister, and this is Savarkar's wife Yamuna Bai. So it was only in 1924 that he was set free, but not with great conditions. That one is he would not participate in any political activities, and that he would remain within the confines of the district of Ratnagiri. And so and this was supposed to be for a span of 5 years, but that span expanded to almost 13 years. So literally a man who was in the prime of his youth, a brilliant scholar, from 1910 that he was arrested in London, he comes out into public life as the president of the Hindu Mahasabha in 1937. 27 years of all kinds of strictures and surveillance that one faces in various degrees. And in the meanwhile, his bachelor's degree was revoked by the Bombay University, and the British government decided to take away, though he had qualified in the law examinations, he was not called to the Gray's Inn, the bench, to practice. So basically, at the end of the day, on paper, he was just a metric pass. So after all the brilliance, all the scholarship, that was all that he was left to show as his achievement academically. So I'll probably conclude with one of his quote, which talks about the philosophy of revolution, since this particular lecture was confined to his revolutionary aspect and not what he did in Ratnagiri or the Hindu Mahasabha later. In Ratnagiri, like Ratanji mentioned, the whole social reforms that were initiated in terms of Hindu Sangathan, creating a unity among the Hindu community, the scourge of untouchability that had to be removed. He was probably the first one, even before Ambedkar came to the scene, to begin the whole idea of intercaste dining, for which, and being a orthodox Brahmin himself, he faced enormous amount of opposition from orthodox Brahmins of Ratnagiri. To when temple entry was banned, he started his own temple for entry of all castes, which is still there in Ratnagiri, called the Patit Pavan Mandir, which began in 1931. So plethora of such things which happened, and many people do accuse that he betrayed the revolutionary movement in some way. But that is not true. It is said that though he took away active part, because every letter, every word of his was under surveillance. And the sad part was he was under surveillance both under the British and immediately after independence, even by the independent government of India, because he was accused of being an accomplice in the Gandhi murder case. And all his private papers are sitting here at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Every letter that came in and out is there with them, because he was not to be trusted. So he lent a lot of moral and intellectual support to the revolutionaries. It is said that he met Bhagat Singh, and in fact in the Nehru Memorial there's a very telling and revealing interview of this man called Durgadas Khanna, who was a congressman, and he was a former member of the Hindustan Socialist Republican Association of Bhagat Singh and Sukhdev and others. And they said that when they were interviewed, they were interviewing Durgadas Khanna, one of the questions they asked was, have you read Savarkar's biography, which was called Life of Barrister Savarkar, and also this 1857 book. So this was almost, as I said, the Bible for Indian revolutionaries, and it was like the entry criteria to become a revolutionary in India. And copies of this book were found with almost all the members of the Lahore conspiracy case in the 1930s. And a decade later, in the 1940s, Rash Bihari Bose and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had an edition of this Indian War of Independence actually printed in Japan. A Tamil edition of this book too, which was edited by Jaimani Subramaniam, one of the publicity officers of Netaji's INA, was also discovered in tatters in one of the raids. So thus almost 3.5 decades after that book was written and brought to India with so much trouble, this served as an inspiration for the revolutionary movement in India. And that's why what I started with, that parallel movement which you draw from 1857 uprising to the naval mutiny of 1946, if you look at it and you posit Savarkar right in the middle as the intellectual colossus of that, the picture is completely different from what we are taught in our history books. So in conclusion, Savarkar's own words summarize his philosophy of a revolution and its objectives, and I quote, "Whenever the natural process of national and political evolution is violently suppressed by the forces of wrong, then revolution must step in as a natural reaction and therefore ought to be welcomed as the only effective instrument to re-enthrone truth and right. You rule us by bayonets, and under these circumstances it's a mockery to talk about constitutional agitation when no constitution exists at all. But it would be worse than a mockery, even a crime, and I think this is a pointer to our times. It would be a mockery, even a crime, to talk of revolution when there is a constitution that allows the fullest and freest development of a nation. And I think this answers a lot of the tukde slogans that keep happening, that when there is a constitution, you don't have to go for a revolution. Only because you deny us a gun, we pick up a pistol. Only because you deny us light, we gather in darkness to compass means to knock out the fetters that hold our mother down. Now I'd like to end again, being a musician too, I'd like to end with a little bit of music. Now this was again you see the human side of this man. After Madanlal Dhingra's execution, he was extremely broken, and then, you know, with his friend Niranjan Pal, the son of Bipin Chandra Pal, who was with him in London, they go to the seaside of Brighton, and there, as he sees the ocean, he just breaks down in tears, and he composes this beautiful song, Sagara Prana Tadamalala, in Marathi. Ocean, you know, my soul is so shaken and in so much of distress, and he chides the ocean, saying, you know, you fooled me, you brought me to this distant land, saying, you know, I will get education, I will get all of this, but then coming here, you know, I want to go back to my little hut of my mother, which is what has been deprived. I've been fooled by you, Sagara. So I thought the best way to end would be with a little clip of that, again tuned by Hridayanath Mangeshkar and sung by all the Mangeshkar sisters. So revolutionary with a heart of a poet. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.